Hello, everybody. This week, last weekend, and today, people all over the world, especially in Europe, in Britain, in the United States, in Canada, are saying no to the G20, no to NATO, no to the war in Afghanistan, no to war budgets, no to war and occupation. We just saw the G20, and I want to start by saying just one or two things about the G20, because all the millions and millions of words that you heard about the G20, really what happened there? What happened there was that billions of dollars were given to the IMF and the World Bank, those hated institutions which are responsible for so much crisis in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But for indebting the people of those countries, for enforcing an agenda of privatization, for imposing the will of the United States and the other old colonial powers on the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So what did you have there? The opposition to nation building, the opposition to any country having the right to establish its own way of life, organize its own economy, its own political system according to its own thought material and its own wishes, and carry out its nation building. Instead, the whole agenda of neoliberal globalization, which is responsible for the crisis which is afflicting the entire world, for the hunger, for the impoverishment, for the unemployment which is growing every single day, that agenda was reinforced. The trading of pollution credits and war budgets, and we're supposed to believe that they care about the environment, and global speculative trading, and the rights of monopolies to do as they please under the dictate of the American monopolies, and to use the whole crisis to establish and reinforce, as Obama says, to make America great again. So not one hair of that neoliberal globalization agenda responsible for all of this devastation, and no restriction of monopoly right took place. So we have, as a backdrop of that, when NATO meets, a world divided between the rich and the poor, between the owners of capital and the workers, between the powerful imperialist states and the weaker oppressed countries, and a world in which the imperialist states themselves are fighting amongst themselves. And that is the world of NATO, and why we say that we want Canada out of NATO, that we want to dismantle NATO, and that on this 60th anniversary it is time to put an end to NATO, which is an aggressive military alliance born in the Cold War and now being used as the vehicle to eliminate the United Nations, to eliminate the right or any vehicle of international law whereby the people of the world can establish that international law against aggression, and instead of that, where the Americans, together with the other imperialist powers, can impose on everybody their will and their domination. So we say no to NATO, no to dismantle NATO and get Canada out of NATO. We say no to the war in Afghanistan and bring the troops home now.
Bring the troops home now! Yeah!
Now I just want people to think for a minute about how the propaganda of Goebbels took, what was that propaganda of Goebbels, of Hitlerite fascism, where those people who were the target of the state-organized violence and attacks then became the problem, then became the enemy that everybody had to, that was responsible for the crisis. And so, according to Goebbels, according to Hitlerite fascism, it was who? The Jews, the communists, the organized working class, the Roma, the disabled, all these people who were the targets of state violence became the targets. And they talk in exactly the same way today about terrorism. Not really against terrorism, but to use the word against anyone who tries to stand up, or who does stand up and takes a stand for their right to self-determination, for their right to determine their own affairs, who fights against aggression, who stands up and defends their right to resist and acts on their right to resist, which is a fundamental part of international law, that right of resistance. So they're blaming of the victims, and we could see that in the attack where they tried to say that George Galloway is the problem. And why is George Galloway the problem? Because he supports Hamas. So of course that is another way of saying that Hamas is the problem. That is to completely cover up the fact that the problem in the Middle East is the refusal to recognize the rights of the Palestinian people. It's the refusal to recognize the rights of the Iraqi people, of the people of Afghanistan, of the people of the whole world. It's the refusal to recognize those rights which is the cause of violence and war and aggression, and not the other way around. And so you can see that on every single question, just yesterday they announced that a Canadian citizen who's been living in the embassy in Sudan for over a year, and he's a Canadian citizen, he cannot come home. Why? They say it's his responsibility to remove himself from George Bush's list. So George Bush makes his list, calls you a terrorist, now it's your problem. So this is how anyone can be targeted. Absolutely anyone. Doesn't matter. You can be an MP. We said all along with the security certificates, what did we say? That this attack against the people who come as refugees or as landed immigrants but are not yet citizens, they're going to use it to attack the citizens. And now you can see how much they're extending this, that all dissent is criminalized. And we saw exactly the same thing when the youth marched against the Nazi organization, the Aryan Guard, last week in Calgary. All the press, what did they say? They blamed the youth for violence. Not a word did they have to say about the fact that this Aryan Guard is well known for committing racist and violent attacks against immigrants, against the Aboriginal people, against anti-racists. Oh no, the problem was the anti-racists. And so you can see more and more that criminalization of dissent that we have to fight against. So we are saying today, when we call on Canada to get out of NATO, that this alliance which ties us hand and foot, and then just to make one point on that, you can see, according to the NATO Charter, if any nation is attacked, then it's an attack on all, okay? Well, I mean, that's a very good principle, if it's an actual principle. But in NATO, it's being used. The Americans are actually claiming that the Afghani people attacked America. I mean, how ridiculous is that? How absurd is that? When did the Afghani people attack America? Such a thing never took place. And so that then ties Canada and every other NATO country to be part of the alliance. So in other words, whenever the American national interest is affected, whenever there's an attack on the right of America to do whatever it pleases in the whole world, then that's going to be called an attack on America. And when you commit aggression, that's called self-defense. So this is Hitlerite logic. And we should really pay attention to it. Because what have we learned in the last few months, since the inauguration in January? We have learned, I think, the most important lesson is that nobody is going to do it for us. That there are no saviors. That nobody's going to come down, Deus ex machina from the machine and undo the criminal war of George Bush and so on. That this is not a matter of individuals, this is a matter of a system which is no longer belongs on the face of this earth, in which the people of the world are rising up against, and we ourselves have to do our part to construct and build that new world. So that's what we're saying when we say no to NATO, bring the troops home now, end the criminalization of dissent, and Canada needs an anti-war government. Thank you very much.